This is Street Knowledge with Chris Graham.
Welcome to the podcast. Chris Graham. We're going to talk some UVA basketball here on this Monday. And, well, you know, the off-season, there's a lot going on this off-season in UVA basketball in the Wahoo world. And we could start with, I'll go out of order here. Start with the interest in a couple of possible transfers that could be added to the UVA mix for the next couple of seasons. Matt Mooney is a 6'3 guard from South Dakota, averaged 18.7 points per game last year. Actually had a couple of good seasons at South Dakota, and now looking to transfer, got a lot of suitors. So UVA is not the only one. Arizona State, Arizona, Oregon, Virginia Tech, UVA, among many. Nebraska, I saw listed. A lot of folks out there interested in this 6'3 guard from South Dakota. But Virginia on the list, and you know, it would be interesting. And Tony Bennett talked in his final radio show of this season after the NCAA tournament about looking probably more for a forward to come in and play and be available. A grad transfer forward to come in and be able to be in the mix for next season. And you know, what this would do, and I think the flexibility of DeAndre Hunter, the lineup flexibility of DeAndre Hunter is what allows the flexibility for Tony Bennett to go around and look for a guard or a forward, maybe the best available player on the grad transfer market. And because Hunter, let's assume that Matt Mooney does choose Virginia among the many teams looking to inject him into their program for the one season. Among things, then you have to decide is Matt Mooney at Virginia, if he's at Virginia, does he start at guard? And I would think that there's a strong possibility. You know, going into this year, Nigel Johnson was probably in the mix to start at guard, but you know, Virginia did have certainly Devin Hall, Kyle Guy, and Ty Jerome coming back, so that made it hard for anyone to from the outside looking in to come in and take starters minutes away from any of those three guys. But now Devin Hall's gone. You still have Jerome. You still have Guy. You can put Hunter in the backcourt. That's where Hunter was recruited to play, and you would not miss a beat. You know, the starting lineup projected right now, I would think, would have him at guard at 6'7", and then you'd have probably Mamadi Diakite at forward at the 4 position, and then Jack Sotto at the 5. And that's a big lineup. I mean, you're talking Kyle Guy, the smallest guy on the floor, at 6'2". Then you've got Jerome at 6'5". You've got Hunter at 6'7". You've got Diakite at 6'9". You've got Salt at 6'10". You've probably got Jay Huff coming off the bench. We'll talk about Jay Huff in a little bit. You got a 7'1" guy coming off the bench at the forward position. That's a big team. Now, if you get a guy like Matt Mooney to come in, then what you can do is say, you know what, here's what we're going to do now. We're going to put DeAndre Hunter at the 4, a stretch 4. He can do it all. He can play in the post. He can play on the perimeter. He can, you know, he's a matchup nightmare at the 4. He's probably, God, you know, at the college level, he's probably more effective at the 4, to be quite honest with you. So you put him in the 4 slot starting, give him the 25 to 30 minutes a game in that slot. He's probably also your best defensive player, not only in the front court, or I guess that's, you know, in the post, but also on the team. Then Diakite comes off the bench. Jack Salt starts alongside Hunter. Huff, again, we'll talk about him in a little bit, but he's coming off an injury. You know, maybe not as pressed to have him come back and be able to take starters minutes or even 18 to 20 minutes off the bench right away. Then you move Mooney in the backcourt. Hey, here's a veteran guy, a 6'3" guy who can shoot, who's played at a couple places. South Dakota, I believe, was Pacific where he transferred from first. So he's got, you know, experience at a couple different places. He can put the ball in the hole, which Virginia really needs, especially from the guard slot. It'd be an interesting addition if that were to come to fruition. There's an if. That's a big if. So you know, that's an if. But that would be intriguing. An intriguing if. Another intriguing if that came up. I'm seeing this just breaking today in the last hour or so. Sacha Killeya-Jones is transferring out of Kentucky, former 5-star recruit. Former top 25 recruit, former UVA commit before he decommitted back, I think it was his senior year. When he went from 4-star to 5-star, all of a sudden his interest went up nationally, and even though he had committed to Virginia, he had not signed a letter of intent, and then he decided to go to Kentucky, like a lot of 5-stars do. and he could not play his way really into the rotation. In 2 seasons, averaged around 3 points a game, around 10 minutes a game. This past season, 3.3 points a game. I think it was 13.7 minutes per game I saw that he played there. And of course, Kentucky recruits classes after classes of one and dones, and so he'd be a rising junior at Kentucky next year with another class of one and dones coming in. He's a 6'10 forward with a lot of skill. I mean, he's a defensive stalwart. Probably know more on that side of the ball. He can put the ball in the basket as well. Now, unlike Matt Mooney, if Matt Mooney were to come to Virginia, wherever he goes, he's going to play right away. Grad transfer rules in the NCAA, you can go right away. At least for now, there is talk about the NCAA changing its transfer rule and allowing a player to transfer once, I think it is, from what I've read. Transfer once without having to sit out a year. But for now, the rule is you transfer, you sit out a year. So Sacha Killeya-Jones, if you were to choose Virginia, there is interest from what I'm reading, a couple different sources. Jamie Oakes, the first one that I saw from 247 Sports, talking about Virginia's coaching staff would be interested in Killeya-Jones, despite the fact that he sort of jilted them at the altar. That there would be interest in having him come in, and it would be maybe beneficial for Killeya-Jones to come in. It'd certainly be beneficial for Virginia. He'd have to sit out a year, so that'd be frustrating. He's going to have to sit out a year wherever he goes. He's transferring out of Kentucky, so he's sitting out a year no matter where he goes. But he'll sit out a year and then come in to, theoretically, if Virginia is able to land him, he'd come in as a fourth-year student with 2 years of eligibility left, and he'd have that whole year as a redshirt to learn the system. And that's how Virginia likes, to bring these guys in. You think about Anthony Gill, for example, from a few years ago when he transferred in from South Carolina. It took him a while, even after the redshirt year, to really learn the system and play in the post at Virginia. We have the example of Jay Huff, who I keep talking about. I'm going to talk about him in a moment. But Jay Huff had to redshirt his first year, didn't really play a lot last year because of the difficulties in picking up Virginia's system. It's not easy to play Virginia's style of ball. And so Sacha Killeya-Jones would come in. I mean, he knows the system. He knows the coaching staff. They recruited him a few years ago, 3 years ago, I guess it was. He knows what he'd be getting into, and so he doesn't have great college numbers, unlike Matt Mooney, who's got stellar college numbers. But the numbers that you can't replace with a guy like Killeya-Jones, top 25 recruit nationally. 5-star recruit. I mean, they don't give those numbers out to guys who don't know how to play basketball. He just wasn't able to crack the rotation at Kentucky. But we'll see. Either those guys or both those guys come to Virginia. It'll be an interesting offseason for Virginia. So now we'll talk about Jay Huff. I'll keep talking about how I was going to talk about Jay Huff. Here we go. Talk about Jay Huff. The news is that unannounced, but it's been revealed in the last few days that he actually suffered a torn right labrum in practice the week of the NCAA tournament. Was actually cleared to play, did not play in the loss to UMBC. And it was noticeable, according to his father, long after the fact. He said he noticed it, and his son apparently didn't tell him before the game, or in the immediate aftermath even. But he said he noticed that his son wasn't shooting left-handed, wasn't really doing anything at all, or excuse me, was shooting left-handed, not doing anything at all with his right hand. And so he noticed that in the pregame drills, and we don't know if that led to the decision not to play Huff. Who knows if Huff had been groomed that week to fill in for the absence of DeAndre Hunter. There's been a lot of speculation that week that, hey, can we finally take the shackles off of Jay Huff and get him in the game, and let's see what happens. Given the absence of the ACC Sixth Man of the Year, we don't know. We don't know if Tony Bennett and staff had decided to go in that route, and then when Huff wasn't able to really go, if that was then taken away from them, and maybe that led to the difficulty in rotations. I mean, we'll never know what the situation may be there. I mean, I say we'll never know. We don't know now. Tony may or may not ever admit what his thinking was going into that game as far as Jay Huff was concerned. But in any case, the situation now, we won't talk about what ifs because that's a what if. We'll talk about looking forward. The thought was that now Huff he redshirted his freshman year as a student. He's now used 1 year of his eligibility, going into year 2 now of eligibility. the thought was that UVA fans, the coaching staff certainly would love to see him step up and be able to earn some minutes. Maybe as a starter, but definitely as a reserve. The thought process being that absent any injection of talent like a Matt Mooney or someone else in the grad transfer market now, that you likely have either Mamadi Diakite or Jay Huff starting at the 4. The other of that grouping starting at the being the first guy off the bench with Jack Salt at the 5. Probably DeAndre Hunter in the backcourt, as I mentioned, if really there's no if there's no injection of additional talent. So Huff, was being leaned upon to provide a good bit there. And a torn labrum, we're being told, is a 3 to 4 month recovery process. And I looked it up online because that sounded odd to me. You don't hear about torn labrums for athletes usually other than either pitchers in baseball or quarterbacks. And those aren't good injuries for pitchers or quarterbacks. They take more than 3 or 4 months for those guys to come back from those injuries. So, the extent of his torn labrum, we don't know. I mean, that's a major joint to have to recover from. It clearly will set his basketball work back significantly. I mean, if you're talking even 3 months, we're looking then into July before he can really even begin. I mean, I assume 3 or 4 months recovery does not include the rehab. There's a rehab process after that. I know I've torn an ACL as an athlete in high school, so there's a rehab process after you recover, and even then, then you have to think it's his right arm. He's the one thing that we know that Jay Huff brings to the basketball floor is his gifted shooting touch. He's not going to be able to shoot a basketball for at least 3 or 4 months. Then there's a recovery process again, and again, as someone who's recovered from an injury, you don't come right back right away. It takes a while to get back. So if you're looking into July and August for him just to get his health back, then there's the rehab process. Camp starts in early October. I mean, there's not a lot of time in between there, even for just the rehab process, and then we're not talking about anything in terms of his basketball skill. Now, he can keep his conditioning up from a running standpoint and that kind of thing, but he's, the one thing about Jay Huff, the kid needed to get bigger. He got bigger from his first redshirt season to his freshman season, where he didn't play much last year. He was listed at 6'11", 190 coming into school. He grew 2 inches and gained 40 pounds. He still looked very, very, very lithe. Very skinny man. He still could have grown. He could still add another 20, 30 pounds easily on that 7'1" frame and still look like a rail, basically. We all remember Ralph Sampson back in the day, the efforts for many years to put weight on him, and it was just hard to on the your body is what it is. So this is not going to help in the strength department, certainly for Jay Huff. So I don't know. I'm not throwing away the season for him next year, but that sets him back a good bit, and could force Virginia to look in some other directions. Maybe this is why you make a hard pitch for a Matt Mooney. If a guy like Matt Mooney can come in and start at guard for you, that allows you to shift DeAndre Hunter full time to the 4 position, and then you've got Diakite, then you've got Jack Salt. That's your 3-man rotation in your front court. You can throw one more in there in the mix, and in case of foul trouble, whatever else. But generally, 3 men in the front court, 5 men in the back court, because the way Virginia plays, I say this a lot, so hopefully I'm not repeating myself too much, but for those who don't think about it nearly as much as me, I don't want to just talk to myself here. Virginia doesn't play the traditional guard, forward, center kind of team. They play 3 guards and 2 forwards, 3 guards and 2 guys in the post. So, if you think about the minutes in a game, there are 200 minutes to be played among the 5 positions, 40 minutes times 5. You generally, obviously you expect 80 minutes out of your front court at Virginia. You expect 120 minutes out of your back court at Virginia. If you're 2 starters, now Jack Salt's going to probably average 20, 22 minutes a game for you. Assume that that Hunter gives you around 30. That does actually open up. Last year you had Hunter eating a lot of minutes up. You had Wilkins eating a lot of minutes up. They were each combined eating up around, when ACC play, NCAA, heading into ACC tournament play, you're talking about a combined roughly 60 minutes a game from those 2 guys. Then you had Salt. There weren't many minutes out there left over, I guess is what I'm saying here. unless Saul is going to somehow go from 20 minutes a game guy to 30 minutes a game guy, I'm not sure he's that guy. Even though he starts, he's still probably more of a 20 minutes a game guy for you, even as a fourth year player at Virginia. If Huff's not available, that does throw some depth issues out there. Your five guys in the backcourt, basically, your three guards. We know that last year Hall and Guy and Jerome were each averaging around 35 minutes a game. That left about 15 minutes roughly for Johnson to throw in there from time to time. So the depth in the backcourt, actually, there's depth there. Marco Anthony, Francesco Baldacci, two guys. Kei Clark, we'll see if he can contribute as a freshman. So yeah, there's some issues there. Huff's injury does set things back, I think, for the team a little bit, at least on paper right now. Barring the development of a grad transfer, barring something internal, again in terms of decision to go with DeAndre Hunter more full time in the front court, that kind of thing, that could definitely be an issue. So the other news of last week, Scott and I were going to get together and do a podcast, and I couldn't get Scott to. We just weren't able to connect. We were going to talk on Thursday. The big news last week, all this stuff's just kind of been floating out there the last day or two, really, was Casey Morsell, the 6'2" guard from Washington, D.C., who committed last week to Virginia. A top 100 recruit. I've seen him ranked as high as the mid-60s by the recruiting services. Expectation that he's a guy that will crack the top 50 after the AAU season, barring injury or anything else. And a centerpiece type guy. He's a junior still, so he's actually committing very early in the process. And a kind of guy that when you get a commitment from a player like this in a region like DC with a lot of basketball talent, you can really sort of build your program around, you build your recruiting around a guy like that. And so that was a big get for Tony Bennett and his staff, 4-star recruit from DC, in an area that I can't think right off if, outside of Justin Anderson, who came from the sort of DC metro area, after decommitting from Maryland, can't think if there have been any other significant recruits for Tony from that area. I'm sure if I'm missing something, you're listening, you'll email me, you'll text me, you'll tweet me, or whatever else. But I can't think that there's anything else that jumps out like that. So to get a guy to commit early from that basketball-rich area, very, very important for this Virginia program, I'd say, just in terms of the get. And you start thinking down the line here. You got him in the mix. Best case scenario of lots of things, right? Killeya-Jones. Let's say he decides to come to Virginia. He sits out this year, so he'll come in will that be 2019, 2020 as a junior. Morsell would be there as a junior. I guess that season you'd also have Kyle Guy and Ty Jerome back as seniors. Theoretically, you have DeAndre Hunter as a junior. If the NBA doesn't lure him away sooner than that, Jay Huff would be back as a redshirt junior as well. It's a loaded program right there, folks, from that standpoint. So that's it's something to think about. I mean, that's the constant churn that college basketball coaches have to face. That we don't really think about. I mean, we think now the season's over. Tony and Jason Williford and Brad Soderberg and the rest of the staff and the players, they just go in mothballs until next November when they start playing again. And we don't see them, we don't think about them, so we just assume that they're not really doing anything. Not at all the case. Certainly the work is from the staff standpoint especially, the work is never ending. Even during the season they're recruiting hard, but now their efforts are focused on the development efforts with Mike Curtis, the strength and conditioning staff, to get the guys even stronger and better shape for next season, and then in developmental aspects too. I've seen some videos of the guys back in the gym shooting. No question that stuff goes on year round for a basketball team, but from a personnel development standpoint, then these efforts to lay the groundwork for the future recruits continues. And I guess a good thing to kind of wrap these thoughts up. there was that fear from folks that after the loss to UMBC that you had Pat Forty talking about the towering fraud that is Virginia basketball, and that what impact would this have on recruiting? Obviously, the interest is there. When you have former five-star recruits like Killeya-Jones, grad transfers like Matt Mooney, top high school prospects like Casey Morsell, interested in Virginia, that shows that folks want to be part of something special. And unfortunately for us, I'll wrap this up with one bit of news linked to by the Saber by the Saber.com editor Chris Wright. Chris, toying with our emotions a bit, he came across a story that was examining the Milwaukee Bucks coaching situation. The Bucks fired Jason Kidd earlier this season. The Bucks will make the playoffs. Malcolm Brogdon, of course, plays for the Bucks. Should be back. I'm not sure if he's back yet. I know he's due back before the playoffs start. But looking at a writer was looking at the possible long-term solutions for Milwaukee at the coaching position, and one of the names thrown out there was Tony Bennett. I guess it's not surprising that Tony could be linked to a job like that. And I say linked to a job. I don't want to overstate that. This is a writer saying, wouldn't it be interesting if? But stranger things have happened. Virginia fans know that Tony, of course, grew up in Wisconsin, played at Wisconsin Green Bay, was on the staff at the University of Wisconsin with his father Dick Bennett, before moving to Washington State with his father and then taking over the Virginia job. So when you start thinking about jobs that could lure a guy away, that's something that at least on paper could be a lure, right? And the article that was written actually had great praise. It mentioned that Jay Wright also would be a possible target. Wright at Villanova, of course, and Wright is a few years further into his career. I think Jay Wright's 56 years old. I think Tony's 49, or will be 49 this year. And so, Jay's a few years further down the line in his career. He won 2 national championships in the last 3 seasons. He's been to, I think, 4 Final Fours in his career, and could be at a stage, and he's in his mid-50s, if he's itching at all, to see, hey, I've already had the success that I could possibly have at the college level. Do I want to see if I can be successful at the pro level? This would be possibly a time for a guy like a Jay Wright to want to test those waters, because at some point, when you're 56 years old, and I'm going to go with that number because that's what's in my head. If you're that age, if an NBA team comes knocking at your door at this age, with the pedigree he has right now, and he says, nope, I'm good. A couple years from now, you're starting to get close to being too old to make that move. I mean, because even though NBA coaches might only last 2 or 3 years on average, you of course, as a general manager, you as the president of team operations, you're thinking when you hire a new coach, this is our guy for 10 years. And so if you're thinking that, you don't necessarily want to hire a guy too close to the age of 60 as a rookie coach in the NBA. I mean, Jay Wright, a lot of guys in college aren't rookie coaches, but they'd be rookies in the NBA. It's a different game to a great degree. So, yeah, that could see that. Tony, at the age of, going on 49 this year, he could have the itch too. I mean, he's had a lot of success in Virginia. He hasn't been to a Final Four, that kind of thing. But he's had a lot of success, and praise in the article for Tony that, it's weird that the college basketball writers who cover the game and the analysts who cover the game will talk about Virginia, and they'll talk about the offensive deficiencies they have. The NBA folks look at Tony Bennett and what he's done and say he knows a lot about offense. But of course, those guys know the game. So that's a testament to what the NBA does. So I'm gonna start a new schedule of podcasts this week. You notice today's a little shorter. It helps if I have Scott or Jeff Fife with me, right? They can flesh things out a little better for me today going solo. But we're going to try to attack a different topic each podcast. Try not to do too much of the generalized stuff. So we're going to do UVA basketball at least weekly. That's my goal. We'll do UVA football right in the middle of spring practice right now. we'll try to devote a podcast each week to UVA football. And then we'll even get into UVA baseball. There's UVA baseball to talk about. The Hoos are struggling, but we'll try to cover the baseball because I that's one thing I do. I'm actually an ESPN baseball announcer. I call games primarily VMI Southern Conference games, but adding my perspective, of course, to our UVA fan base here at AFP. And then we'll do a pro wrestling podcast, and we'll see what else we get into. But I want to kind of dive down deep into the topics. And so if you're listening, and thank you for listening to this podcast, and you've been a regular listener, if there's something you want me to address specifically, feel free to text me. Like I say text me, tweet me. You can text me if you have my phone number, right? Tweet me at AugFreePress. I'm pretty active on Twitter. So tweet me at AugFreePress. You can actually email me as well. It might be the easiest thing. AugustaFreePress2@gmail.com. And love to hear from you. All the information is on the Augusta Free Press website. Very easy to get in touch with me as far as thoughts, concerns, etc. And I'd love to talk about what you want me to talk about on a future podcast. For now, I'm going to sign off. I am Chris Graham, and thanks for listening. Wahoo wah.